Hi and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is a little bit different to my previous ones. So first of all, because you can see my face, which I know not just my hands like my previous videos. And so in this video I'm going to be talking about the books that I read last week, which is the week of 15th of June. I'm also going to have clips of my book journal in my Lewis and Louisa planner, just showing you some of the quotes that I really liked. And so through this video I'm going to talk to you about 4 of the books that I read last week, as well as a bit of information about each one and favourite quotes, as well as what I thought about them. So in this video I'm going to be talking about the 4 books that I read last week. So that's Reaper by Jonathan Pongratz, Haze by Rebecca Crunden, The Beauty of Broken Things by Victoria Connelly, and finally Aurora Rising by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. So the first book that I'm going to review is Reaper by Jonathan Pongratz. This is a horror novella, so it's just 96 pages. It took me about 1 hour to read on the 15th of June, and I was given a free copy of this in return for an honest review. So my star rating for this was 4 stars. Reaper follows Gregory, who's 13 years old, and his younger sister Imogen, or Immy, who's 7, and Gregory has never been allowed until now to babysit his younger sister, and his parents are going out for the evening on Halloween, and so he's really excited to have been given the opportunity to prove himself as well as earn a bit of pocket money by looking after his sister while his parents are away. And this, as I say, this story is really short, so it's really gets straight into the action immediately. And I really love the writing in this story. So it's incredibly atmospheric. It gave me chills at points. Gregory and Immy go into the basement, which is where they've historically never been allowed to go, and the door's always been locked. But somehow they go down, the door is open and they go down into the basement, and that's basically when everything kind of kicks off. Yeah, it was incredibly atmospheric, very spooky, really creepy. And I thought the ending had a great twist as well that I didn't see coming. So if you're looking for something short and sweet to read, I definitely recommend this one. I'd say that it reminded me quite a lot of Stranger Things, the TV series, or It by Stephen King. So if you're a fan of those two, then check this one out. So the next book that I'm going to review today is Haze by Rebecca Crunden. So this was published on the 5th of August 2018. It has 222 pages, and I read this between the 15th and the 17th of June. I rated this at 4 stars, and I was given a free copy of this book by Rebecca in return for an honest review. So this one I was given for free by Rebecca in return for an honest review, and she told me that this one was a paranormal mystery, but actually I would say that this is more of a romance that has some paranormal elements. So the story starts with sort of focuses around Eric and Eliza, who are 19 years old, and they've recently gotten engaged in secret. So they go for a hike with Eliza's sister Sam and Sam's girlfriend Maya, and basically while they're there on this hike, the two of them tell Sam and Maya that they're engaged. Obviously they're really excited about it, and they expect that they are going to get a positive reaction, obviously. But unfortunately, Sam is really upset and angry about this, and she doesn't approve. And as they're arguing, she gets right up in Eric's face, and then she goes to shove him, or he goes to push her away gently, but somehow she goes flying through the air, and she dies, or she hits a tree and she dies. So the story then cuts to 5 years later, where Eric, after Sam's funeral, he felt awful about what happened, and he left town, and he hasn't been in touch with the family since. His father has recently died, so he's now come back into town, and basically the story follows what happened to Eliza and her family after this horrible tragedy, and it also follows, has a paranormal element in that Eliza and Eric then work together along with their friend Miles and a few others try and figure out what exactly happened that day, and how Eric was able to just touch Sam and have her fly through the air. So it was a really interesting story. So it does have a lot of drug use in there, because Eric himself has come from a rough background and was a drug dealer from 11 years old, and Eliza herself has used drugs to try and deal with her grief and her feelings. But I thought this was really interesting, character-driven story, and I really enjoyed reading about the relationships between, the relationship between Eric and Eliza, as well as Eliza and the other friends and men that are around her as well. I thought both of them were incredibly well-written characters, really well fleshed out characters, and I was really sort of rooting for both of them throughout the whole book. So the third book that I'm going to review today is The Beauty of Broken Things by Victoria Connelly. This was published on the 9th of June, so it's just been released, and I read this between the 18th and the 19th of June. It has 314 pages, and I rated this one at 5 stars. I was actually given a free copy of this book, an advance review copy, in return for an honest review. Victoria herself has actually written quite a lot of books. I think when I had a look on Google, she'd written about 20 books, but this is actually the first one of hers that I've read. So The Beauty of Broken Things starts with Helen, and she currently works as an admin assistant in London, and the story starts with her on her train journey home that day, and she has a real passion for photography, and she's also really interested in really obsessed with a social media network called Galleria, and she uses that. It's basically like Instagram, and she uses that every day. She posts lots of photos of things that she sees around her, and she also has quite a few friends that she's made through the network. Her main friend that she's made is someone under the username Beautifully Broken, and unfortunately, and while she's talking to this person who she's never met in real life, she decides that actually she's going to quit her job, she's going to pursue her passions and become self-employed as a photographer. Unfortunately, before she can go home and talk to her husband about this, she dies in a horrific train accident, and so her and 10 other people are killed instantly. So it's quite a lot to digest just in the first chapter, and it was quite a really shocking way to start the story, because I obviously got really attached to Helen as a character. I thought she was really interesting, really well written, and I could really relate to her personally. And so then it was really shocking to then find that after all of that character development in just the first chapter, that actually she dies. So the story from chapter 2 is actually more about her widowed husband, Luke, who several weeks later is now trying to come to terms with her death and goes through her belongings, and he comes across a chipped vase with a note, and it turns out that this was going to be a gift for her friend, Beautifully Broken, who it turns out is a woman called Aurora. So Luke decides to try and find Aurora and go to her house and give her this gift, as well as tell her what's happened, because he hasn't told anyone on social media about what happened to Helen, and he sort of thinks that that will be a good way to honour Helen's memory. Unfortunately, when he finds Aurora, it turns out that she's a recluse. She lives in this magnificent castle, but no one ever sees her. Even her gardener has never actually seen her in the flesh. He only communicates with her through notes through the door. And basically, it's, despite the really depressing start to the story and the really shocking beginning, it actually becomes a really interesting and really sweet story, and it's really a really hopeful story as well. So this story to me was really more about hope and finding your way through loss and grief and how you cope with tragedy. So it really, I thought it was really beautifully written and really sensitively done as well. I also really liked that it sort of validates friendships that you have online. Like, I'm someone who has used the internet for quite a long, for many years, and I always sort of was always kind of made to feel like they weren't, people that I met online were not real friends, and they weren't like real people. So I actually really liked that in The Beauty of Broken Things, you are made to feel like those friendships are valid and they are important and they do change you and they can help you and change your life. So that was a really good aspect to it. And I also really enjoyed that, you know, that it does have a hopeful ending, that it shows that you can deal, you know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel when you're dealing with grief or any tragedy that's happened to you. So one of my favourite quotes from The Beauty of Broken Things is in the first chapter when Helen is on the train, and that's this one here. She had no idea how to become self-employed and solely reliant on herself for an income. The prospect was terrifying and yet exhilarating at the same time. If she didn't do it now, then when? Nobody was going to come up to her and offer her a more fulfilling life, were they? She had to go out and find it herself. And I just thought that that was like quite empowering and just a really, really great quote. So the final book that I'm going to review today is Aurora Rising. And so this has 473 pages and it was published in May 2019. So I started this one on the 8th of June and I finished it on the 20th of June. And I give this a 5-star rating, and it was probably one of my favourite books this year. And so the reason why, though, it took me so long to finish was because I enjoyed this book so much that I didn't want to finish it before the sequel came back from Illumicrate. It actually hasn't yet arrived, but it just got to the point where I was like, I just have to read this book. I just have to find out what happens. I loved it so much. So I've seen this book all over social networks, especially because the sequel, Aurora Burning, came out recently. But I'd never actually read this book, and I actually had never read any of J. Kristoff's books before either. And I really, really enjoyed it. So Aurora Rising, I keep getting them confused. So Aurora Rising follows Tyler Jones, who is a student at the Aurora Academy, and it's the day before he is able to choose who he wants in his squad. So he is like known as the golden boy, and so he's, you know, top of his class. He's been always like well behaved. He doesn't swear. He always does everything by the book. And because he's top of the class, he then gets to choose who he gets first choice of who he would like in his squad. So he's unexpectedly really nervous about this, even though he has no real reason to be. So to try and deal with his nerves, he goes out in a spaceship and goes for a fly around. But while he's out there, he receives a distress call. And it turns out that this is from a ship called the Hadfield, which has been missing for over 200 years. And there's only one survivor left, which is Aurora or Auri, who's the girl on the cover of the book. So he rescues Auri and brings her back to the academy. Unfortunately, because of that, that means that he misses his chance to choose his squad, and so he is basically then left with all of the misfits and basically all the people that no one else picked, as well as his sister and his best friend from childhood, who like no one else was ever going to pick. Like there was no way his sister was going to go with somebody else. So what I mostly liked about this book, it's a really well written story. It's very gripping. I love the mystery around Aurora and her, you know, and Auri and what's happened to her, and you know who she is and why, you know, why there's this big mystery around the Hadfield and the mystery about what happened to their ship. So I absolutely love this book, and for me this is probably one of my favourite books that I've read all year. And what I found really made it, for me, what really made it a 5-star read was the story was great. I really enjoyed the story. It's got a heist, and I always love reading heists in books. But what really for me made it, you know, that 5-star top level read was the characters. So all of them are kind of misfits, like they have, you know, they don't really get along very well. And so Tyler has to really try and get them to work together as a team. But for me, what really made it great was that the characters are just really distinctive. They're all very individual. They're all quite funny as well. Like there was also quite a lot of humour in this story. It does end on a cliffhanger. As I said, there's the second book came out this year, Aurora Burning, and they are part of a trilogy, so I am unfortunately expecting to have to wait to find out the conclusion. It has a really interesting mystery because we slowly start to uncover a bit more about Aurora herself and where she's come from, and you know what happened to her ship. So I'm really looking forward to reading the next one in the series and just finding out a bit more about her as well as about all the other characters. So those are the 4 books that I read last week. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please do give it a thumbs up, and also if you have any book recommendations then do leave a comment below, or if you've read any of these books and want to tell me a bit about what you thought about them, again just let me know below. In the description I will put links to each of my reviews so you can read my full thoughts on each of them if you want a bit more information, or of course you know you can add them to your TBR list as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.